All right, what's up, everyone? Dr. Jacob Wilson here. It's great to see you guys. We've actually been filming for our academy. Now, one thing we're literally, guys, when I tell you we have been working on this the last 3 years, listen, when I was in school, it was awful because, like, no one cared about gaining muscle and losing fat. No one cared about bodybuilding. No one cared about getting enormous and strong, right? Professors didn't care about it. They weren't trained at it. You know what I mean? So that was my focus. Is the reason why I went to school is because I wanted to learn from a molecular to whole body level how people can optimize muscle size while losing fat at the same time. It was a passion of mine. It's still a passion of mine today. And so what we have been working here is tirelessly creating this academy. And so we've been filming actually several lectures on carbohydrates today. How many do you need to replenish? What do you need to for lifting weights? All sorts of cool stuff. And this academy, we're going to be launching it. You're the first to know about this. We'll be launching this. It's going to be, we're only going to allow a limited number of people in because we're going to do a test run. Okay? We're going to do a test run, and we're only going to allow probably maybe even 20 people in it first into the first class. And it's going to be a 6-month course. And when I tell you, you will walk out of this course with a greater amount of knowledge on the science of gaining muscle and losing fat and getting strong than you would learn through a BS degree, a master's degree, and a PhD probably. Because we studied so much outside of those degrees that it's insane. The amount of knowledge you're going to have is going to be insane. Insane. It's an intensive course. We're creating it now. We will launch that in November. So if you are interested in that, make sure you go to themusclephd.com and email us and say you're interested. We'll be talking more about that later. But first off, guys, thank you so much for coming here today. I have a real interesting story. You know, I used to be a cat guy, okay, 100%. And I still am a cat guy, okay. Our 2 cats, Diego and Mercedes, they have their own room in the house, okay. And they have their own room. That bathroom in that room is theirs. They got their litter box there. They have actually, yeah, we did. We actually bought.
Bigger TV than mine.
They do. We bought a 60-inch TV for the cats, so you could put cat games up there. You know, they can play with them. These are spoiled cats, and so. But actually, Isabella, she came into my life. Actually a while now, like 3.5 years ago now, and huge animal person, loves animals, loves the cats, they love her. But she because of her, I had 2 dogs that came into my life, and we ended out, funny story, we ended up going to basically a rescue. And of course, what are you looking for? You're going to get a lab who's super smart or a golden retriever. And the first cage that we walked up to, I saw Manny. And Manny was like, lived in a cage his whole life. And his owner just put a food in his cage and left him there. He just sat there his whole life. And Manny was a senior, and he couldn't move, and he was obese. Like, Manny could not stand for more than 2 minutes without having to lay down. And so anyway, Isabella had wanted to get Darla, who's this really cute hound. But Manny's just like really obese, depressed dog. And we said I got teary-eyed. We said we're taking Manny home. We took him home. And so these dogs, not me, but Isabella feeds them. So now, anyway, when we got Manny, if there's squirrels in our yard, he couldn't get them. Like, I'm telling you right now, like, if there was a squirrel on the fence, by the time Manny took 2 steps, the squirrel was gone, okay, because Manny was so slow. And now, in the last, like, 3 months, Manny's caught 3 squirrels. Manny's now jacked. He is fast as lightning. He's super lean. It's incredible, like, what this dog's story. And we'll actually be posting this up on our YouTube channel so you can see Manny's transformation. So I know, listen, a lot of you guys are pet lovers. Our cat Diego actually went from being kind of obese to lean, kind of lean. Okay. If he exercised more, he'd be really lean. Manny went from being obese to not being able to move to an athlete who can catch squirrels. And so all the stuff we talk about for humans, you can apply to your animals. You know, your animals don't have to die young. They don't have to be out of shape. They can be in great shape like you. And one of the number one things that you can do for animals, and we're starting this, Charlie had the idea of talking about this to start off, is because what do? If you look at the ingredients in your normal dog food, if you were to eat that most of the time, you'd probably die young. You'd probably get type 2 diabetes. You'd have arthritis. And you'd probably die very young, okay? And you would have a horrible life. It's the same thing with your dogs. So anyway, thanks to Isabella, what we do is we feed she home cooks for them. And she cooks keto for them. So she cooks like ground meat. And now sometimes some people do it, like Dr. Ryan Lowry does a raw keto diet for Scoot, where he feeds them raw food. For our dogs, we just because it's also you have to be obviously raw. You got to make sure you're on point on that stuff. But we have to cook a lot. Isabella cooks a lot. So, but anyway, we cook them keto. We cook keto for them. Ground meat. You can just do ground beef, bacon, all that stuff, and they love it. They absolutely love their food. And Manny's lost like 20 pounds, and he's a super. And Darla, when we first got her, was bald, and now she's got a full coat, shiny coat. She's loving life. And so, and Diego too, I'll show you some before and after pictures. Yeah, he still has some fat on him, but he does have before and after pictures. He's a big boy, but he's healthy, and his blood work is great. So my point is, and then what do? I take Manny out for walks. I sprint Manny. Charlie knows that. But the point is that I highly recommend that for your animals, make sure they're not sedentary. I would take them, we like high intensity interval training, so you can take your animals out and sprint them. You can cook for them. They're your best friends. Your cats are your best friends. Treat them the way you would treat yourself. Now, what can we learn from Manny, Diego, Mercedes, Darla? Obviously, you know that a low carbohydrate diet can be super beneficial for you, but also high intensity interval training is one of the best ways that you can get lean, shredded, and in great shape. So that's my spiel on animals. I highly recommend that you do that for them. I'll take any questions.
Yeah. We're still waiting on more questions to roll in, so I think sticking with current events, our Tampa Bay Lightning are currently in the Stanley Cup. What are your thoughts on hockey training and some ways that they could optimize that training to beat the Stars?
Oh, wow. So, well, let's just say that's a really great question. So, hockey's a really tough sport, obviously. And actually, we've actually monitored the Tampa Lightning for years, actually. We had these complex sensors on the Tampa Lightning, and we would track their calorie expenditure, what part of the rink that they spent a lot of time on. And they learned a lot, I think, from that stuff. So I think I'm going to say, biasly, I think they gained a lot of knowledge from that, and that is contributing in part to them winning the Stanley Cup here. Hopefully, right? But anyway, if you look at hockey, it is a sport where you do burn through carbohydrates really fast. But one thing we were just talking about earlier that I think is super beneficial for recovery is, in this case, like hydrolyzed whey is really good for recovery. Hydrolyzed whey, you're playing hockey really rapidly. Hydrolyzed whey seems to replenish carbohydrate stores that much faster, even though your carbohydrates might be moderate. So if you're a hockey player, I think hydrolyzed whey can be super beneficial. Now, I'm going to go ahead and if you're someone watching the Tampa Lightning, okay, if you're watching the Tampa Lightning and you're a hockey player and you want to be better at hockey, I used to play hockey myself. I played hockey in Canada at a really high level. And what I can tell you is this, everything's sport specific. So your shifts are our coach used to say, get off the ice in 30 seconds because you can go all out, right? So say your shifts last 20 to 40 seconds, okay? Well, your cardio should mimic that. So you're doing high intensity interval training. If you're playing hockey, you probably shouldn't be running 6 miles. I remember when I was playing hockey, I used to have to run like 5-mile runs in the snow in Canada. And I was running in the mountains, right? It was like rocky shit, okay? So like I was like, we literally as a team, we would go out and like run 5 miles in the snow at elevation, because you guys know Calgary, Banff is next to Calgary, and so we would go up to the mountains like in Banff and run these long miles. And I couldn't figure out, no matter how much plyometrics I did, no matter how much heavy lifting I did, I couldn't get faster that year. And the reason why is because I was doing these long runs in the snow. So you have competing adaptations. So make sure for hockey, you should be lifting heavy. You should be doing interval training. You should be doing plyometrics. You should be doing power training as well. And that's just a quick spiel, man. Look, you could spend an entire course just on training for hockey.
So I think the question we've gotten a few times already, but it's still pretty relevant, really since March. What are your thoughts on having to wear a mask in the gym while you're working out?
Well, okay, well, if your gym makes you wear a mask while you're working out, I mean, it sucks working out with a mask. It's hard for me to say. You get used to it, right? I think that obviously from a pandemic perspective, obviously, if I'm like perspirating, I'm training really hard, it's probably beneficial for the next person next to you to wear a mask. Now, fortunately, at ASPI, honestly, we only take 50 total members. We have this concierge model. So, and we have like a 22,000 square foot facility. So when people are at ASPI and they're training, the social distancing is like 2,000 square feet. So people don't have to wear a mask here. They get temperature checked, all that stuff. But we only take a select number of people, whereas other like facilities, they might have 1,000 members, in which case you got to train with a mask. But at Applied Science Performance Institute, we only have limited slots available. So if someone is interested in being like an ASPI member, well, you come in here, you get tested. We actually have testing for like the antibodies for like the virus. So people come in here, they get fully tested, and no one's around. So you don't have to, because the social distancing is so extensive here. But if you come to ASPI, you don't have to wear one because your social distancing is so extreme.
There you go. I think this is an interesting one. We have a question about sleeping at night. I know this is something that like shift workers ask a lot. Is there a difference between sleeping at night or having to sleep in the day, and how that might affect like gains, fat loss, stuff like that?
So that's a really great question. And so let me say this. I'm going to say this. And by the way, if you're interested in ASPI, go to www.theaspi.com. www.theaspi.com. But anyway, going back to the shift worker stuff, it's tough, man. It's really tough. There's a lot of studies with shift workers that actually show that shift workers have a higher degree of depression than people who aren't shift workers. Now, why is that the case? What happens is that, number one is that light is super beneficial. So like when I go out in the sun, I get vitamin D. I'm getting a lot of blue light when I go out into the sun. And that blue light is really important for my cognitive function, for me not to be depressed, for me to function optimally. Shift workers miss a lot of the sunlight. They miss vitamin D. They don't get as much blue light, and a lot of it leads to depression. So one way that you can overcome that high shift work is by ordering yourself like a blue light device. They sell them online, but if you get a blue light device, you can mimic what you're getting in the sun with blue light. You need to make sure you're supplementing with vitamin D. Expose yourself to a blue light stimulus during the day. There are studies that show workers that they did a study where they put blue light inside of like the lights and replace normal light with like blue light, and the workers were way more productive. So I think one way, if you are a late night shift worker, you need to get a blue light device and use that. But as far as training is concerned, your body will typically adapt to the time of day that you train. So your body should adapt to that as long as you're using blue light to overcome things like depression, okay? And you still need to maintain a normal sleep schedule. So like Charlie's wife, for example, works at the hospital. So she's got to deal with a lot of stuff. She's got to deal with, obviously, a lot of times with different shift work, right? But she dominates, crushes everybody she competes against in powerlifting. So she's absolutely crushing everybody, like, and her numbers are off the charts on a national level. International level now. and she's got to deal with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can definitely adapt to it. It's just you have to maintain a specific sleep schedule and don't get off it just because everyone else is awake during the day.
We have a question about what are some of your tips for rejoining the gym after a long time off, I assume due to quarantine or something like that.
So what are tips for coming out off the gym after a long time in quarantine? Well, when you rejoin that, you, number one, don't go back up to your old training volume on day one. So you're like, oh, I'm going to look at my training logs. I was doing 20 sets for legs right before I go, I got to get back in this quick. I'm going to start doing 20 sets of legs again. That's not the best thing that you should do. What you should probably do is go in, keep your volume low, like 3 to 4 sets of body part, and have start off your first workout 3 to 4 sets, moderate intensity, and get your form back. When you after the first week of doing that, come back and then do higher. You can bump your intensity up to where it was, meaning you're not lifting as heavy as you were, right? But you're gonna lift semi-heavy, but again, low volume, 3 to 4 sets. And do that probably for like 2 to 3 weeks. Your muscles will sort of develop where they're not as sore as they would be. And then after like 2 to 3 weeks, you can start up your volume. So again, you're starting off with compound movements, 3 to 4 sets. First week, low intensity. Second week, start upping your intensity to what you can lift. Maybe in an 8 to 12 repetition range. Once you've adapted that and you're not so sore anymore, now you can start going back up to your 10, 12, 13, 14, 15 set workouts.
Sweet. So we have somebody who's trying to cut and lean out. How many times would you recommend them doing high-intensity interval training if they're already doing resistance training 5 or 6 times a week?
So you don't overtrain and everything. If you're doing your normal resistance training, I recommend 2 to 3 times a week and no more of that than high-intensity interval training. Because what will happen if you do that too often, it will actually depress like your testosterone levels. You'll start getting cranky and you'll actually overreach and impair your resistance training. So 2 to 3 times a week.
What are your thoughts on eating carbs post-workout or pre-workout while trying to lose fat?
So eating carbs pre-workout or post-workout while trying to lose fat, I don't think you should do it at all. Don't really eat carbs before you work out. And there's data that actually talks about and after your workout, if you're carb adapted, have your carbohydrates should probably just be like lower to moderate glycemic. Like I wouldn't down a Gatorade right after you worked out. Probably just have a low glycemic, higher fiber carbohydrate after you work out. It's not going to replenish carbohydrate stores as fast, but you're dieting, you don't really need to.
What do you think about counting calories?
Okay, so here's the thing. When you're there, the old saying. I think it was Socrates who said it. Know thyself. But anyway, know thyself. Okay, or it might have been Plato. I don't know. I'll remember. Socrates or Plato said, "Know thyself." Okay. Anyway, you should know yourself when it comes to optimizing your physique. So think about this for a second. If you're a sprinter, do you time yourself? Yeah. If you're a power lifter, do you see what your 1RM is? Yes. So if you're a bodybuilder, you kind of want to know how your body responds to calories and carbs and proteins. That's the best thing that you can do. But once you kind of have tracked yourself, maybe on MyFitnessPal or whatever, for like a month, you kind of can guesstimate. So I would say tracking your calories every once in a while so that you know how you respond is good. So maybe track them for a month at the beginning of the year and then track them midway or at the end of the year as well. But the rest of the time, probably not. If you find your body falling off, go back to doing it.
Sweet. So we have a question about intra-workout carbs and EAAs and how they decrease muscle protein breakdown. What are your thoughts on the usefulness of that?
So that's a great question. One of the biggest things that people talk about with carbohydrates is that they can help lower protein breakdown. The thing to understand about carbohydrates and protein breakdown is it's based on the insulin response. Yes, insulin does help lower protein breakdown, but it's at very low levels. Okay? So, and it's at levels that are low enough to where whey protein will actually stimulate. the maximum effect on protein breakdown is maximized with the amount of insulin that whey protein alone stimulates, okay? Probably EAAs will probably do the same thing. So my thing is that basically just having essential amino acids during your workout is probably more than enough to stop protein breakdown where you don't need carbohydrates. And for the majority of the people, unless you're training for unless you're training for like 2 hours and doing super high reps, carbohydrates aren't going to help your performance. And BCAAs or EAAs alone is probably just good enough to lower that protein breakdown and raise protein synthesis without the need for carbohydrates. And there's studies that actually looked at protein balance, where you take EAAs or protein and you add carbohydrates to it, and really doesn't do anything. So during your workout, or really just before your workout, maybe 10 to 20 grams of essential amino acids, you're fine.
And I think one caveat with that too is that people forget to read in research studies that oftentimes subjects are training fasted in those, right, to reduce variables. So
it's a really good point.
In the real world, if you're training fed, does it even matter that much?
It might not matter, exactly. If you eat a meal and then like an hour later, it might not even matter that much. Most of these studies are in a fasted state. It's a really good point. Yeah. Really good point.
Interesting one.
It's a really good point.
What do you think is the best way to increase mitochondrial density?
Mitochondria is where you burn fat, right? The best way to increase mitochondria is depletion. So for you guys were talking about burning fat. That's why I said don't have carbs before your workout and after your workout, because when your muscle sees it's low on carbohydrate source, it ramps up molecular signals that say increase mitochondria. So the best way to do it is train in a low carbohydrate state, train in a depleted state. Is probably the best way to do it. High intensity interval training is a great way to do it. So low carb dieting, high intensity interval training. If you're not low carb dieting, then I would train. Don't replenish your carbs. Train again in a depleted state, and before you consume carbohydrates. So you need to train carbohydrate depleted. And if you are eating higher carbs, then you need a carbohydrate cycle.
Does too much estrogen hormone in the body make building muscle more difficult?
Higher levels of estrogen, okay, estrogen there's some studies that show estrogen helps you recover from workouts fast, so it makes you less sore. So, for example, like bodybuilders who are taking certain drugs that aromatize and convert to like estrogen, they sometimes they are less sore and they gain more mass. But let me say this. Having high estrogen levels and low testosterone is a recipe to get fat and soft and not gain as much muscle. So really, you know what I mean? That's not ideal at all. So biggest thing about like higher levels of estrogen is the other side. What do you notice about the drugs that aromatize? People hold a lot of water, their face gets round, and they tend to gain more fat. Okay, so I would never recommend. Don't listen to the beginning of this clip and go think I'm gonna, I want my estrogen levels really high. So the point is that really high estrogen levels are probably not ideal for optimizing muscle and fat, the muscle to fat ratio. But a little bit higher estrogen could help you recover better. But you're not going to be dense and shredded with high levels of estrogen.
So we touched on training for hockey for a minute. We have a question about what are some ideas for training for soccer?
Well, the thing about soccer is really like you're running all the time on the field, right? So you're getting a lot of activity there just by running all the time on the field. So for you, it's going to depend on what you want. If you're trying, speed's the name of the game. So for you, I would still recommend like heavy lifting so you can get faster. Plyometrics is going to be great so you can get faster. Training for power, over speed training is going to be great for soccer. Using accommodating resistance like bands and chains is going to help you. All those things are going to be really good, I would say, for soccer. And I wouldn't do a lot of long distance runs, even though it seems specific. You're already doing a lot of that, so you don't want to get slower. So for you, I'd be constantly trying to counter that with interval training, heavy training, power training, speed training.
Sweet. So it's an interesting one. I'm not exactly sure how to ask it, but what are your thoughts on kind of a bulkier midsection versus a toned midsection? So maybe like the power belly versus like a shredded kind of model abdomen. Like, what are your thoughts on how to train, eat, etc. for one or the other?
Well, usually people are coming to us and saying like, "Hey, my abdomen's too bulky," you know. I'll start with training for that. So let's assume that you're really lean. Both you see me have two people; they're both really lean. Okay. So the thing to sort of understand with like abs and stuff like that, when you look at that blocky look, like that blocky look, a lot of it you're talking about like is the obliques. So for example, if you look at some bodybuilders have really large obliques. So if you respond really like well to if your obliques grow a lot, then you probably don't want to do like a lot of side bends and things of that nature, because the obliques are going to basically perform like they'll bring you up, right? Okay, so if you're resisting a dumbbell, you're coming back up, that's going to hit the obliques. Twisting movements are going to hit the obliques. And the abs in general are going to be utilized in general to stabilize the whole core. So like if you're doing squats and deadlifts, you're going to hit that midsection. So the biggest thing to understand is that you have to think about how do your abs respond. If your abs respond by putting on mass really fast, then training them directly with heavy weight might not be advantageous for you if you want a really tiny waist. You just might, honestly, with your abs, just doing squats and deadlifts might make them look fine, and you might not do anything if you respond really well that way. If you're trying to make your waist look super blocky, do a bunch of side bends, do a bunch of resisted twisting movements. That's a great way to make you really blocky. A lot of compound movements, heavy deadlifts, all of that's going to help your waist. However, if you're a bodybuilder and that compound deadlifts, twisting movements make your waist kind of grow really big, you might have to back off that.
That's a good one. How would you combine martial arts with weight training if you do an upper-lower split 2 times a week?
Well, you know, if you're doing first off, that's a great split. Upper-lower split 2 times a week. So I'm assuming like you're training, so you're keeping your resistance training frequency not drastically high. It's great that you're resistance training with the martial arts because it's important. There's a good story. One of my good friends, he worked with my dad when he was growing up. His name was Ray Jackson, and Ray Jackson was the strongest guy in the fire department. And he's still like to me a really good mentor. But anyway, and Ray now is probably approaching 60, and he still has the body of a Greek god, okay? But Ray was strong AF. And he got into jiu-jitsu. And actually at the time, this is way back when the Gracies introduced basically mixed martial arts, the Ultimate Fighting Challenge. And with the Ultimate Fighting Challenge, Hoist Gracie came out and said, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu is the best Jiu-Jitsu in the world. I'll kick everyone's ass. And there was no weight class back then. So like I think so Gracie was facing like sumo wrestlers and stuff like that and kicking their ass. And anyway, so after he won the Ultimate Fighting Championship, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu exploded. And Ray went in, and his first day, they were like, oh, we'll put you with the beginners. He kicked all their asses. Now, Ray had never done any martial arts. So then they started putting Ray with black belts, elite like Gracie black belts, and he was throwing them across the room. So what's the point? Strength training itself is a form of martial arts, I would argue. Because if you're strong AF, I'm sorry, you can throw someone across the room, okay? So it's good that you're strength training. And what my point is that with your strength training, you should be training for strength and power, because those are two important variables for martial arts, okay? Your movements are quick, they're fast, they're explosive. You should train that way. You need to make sure you're training for maximal strength, like at your basics. You should be able to lift like double your body weight, like on squats. You should be able to squat double your body weight. Minimum as a starting, power burns in the flame of strength. You should be able to squat double your body weight. If you can't, make sure you can. Same thing with deadlift, right? No, that's not like a tremendous amount of weight. You should be able to do that. So make sure your minimum lifting, double your body weight on bench and on squat and deadlift. You know what I mean? Probably at least like 1.5 times your weight on the upper body type movements. You need to be strong. And then you need to train for power as well, which are more of your explosive movements, your accommodating resistance where you're putting bands and chains on, things like that. You're doing a lot of compound movements, bench, squats, deadlifts. When you're hitting your hamstrings with hardcore movements like good mornings, okay, stiff-legged deadlifts, all of those things, right? Very, very important. Yeah.
I think we got time for one more, so I think we'll finish kind of where we started. What are your thoughts on carb cycling, and what are some of the best ways to do it?
So carbohydrate cycling is great. What I recommend with carbohydrate cycling is a very simple approach. I like 2 low days, a moderate day, and a high day, and then back to low, moderate, high. So two low days, moderate day, high day, low, moderate, high. Oh, now you have to define low to high carbohydrates. How many carbohydrates you need to replenish your muscle carbohydrate source? 1 to 3 grams per pound of body weight is all you need to replenish your carbohydrate source. Anything more than that, and it's not beneficial. It's just not beneficial. We've done lots of studies on this. So if you're more endomorphic, I would say that your low carb days are 1 gram per pound of body weight to your high days might be 1.5 to 2 grams per pound of body weight. So if you're 150 pounds, your low days are going to be 150 grams of carbs. Your high days might be, 250, right? So that's if you're carb adapted, right? Now you can take it to extremes, and you go really low carb, which is under 100 grams. And so, for example, you'd have 2 low days where like 100 grams of carbs, 100 grams of carbs. On those days, you're purposely depleting. Your moderate day might be 200 grams of carbs, and then your high day might be 250, 300. If you're more like ectomorph and you don't really gain fat, then you could be on the upper range where you're going 1 to 3 grams of carbs per pound of body weight. Your low days might be 1 gram. Your moderate days, 2 grams per pound. Your high days, 3 grams per pound. And again, follow that split. 2 low, 1 moderate, 1 high, 1 low, 1 moderate, 1 high. I think that's it.
That's it, yeah.
Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure that if you have a dog like Manny or Darla or even cats, cook for them, sprint them. You say, how do you sprint a cat? I would use a laser. Okay? Thank you so much, guys. See you next time.